Chapter 5 of Tractate Shevuos continues covering the various laws of oaths, now particularly on oaths of deposit. The first Mishnah says, laws of oaths of deposit, essentially swearing that you've repaid a loan, apply to men and women, to relatives and non-relatives, and to those qualified or disqualified as witnesses. According to Rabbi Meir, if he spoke the oath himself, it applies whether or not it was taken in court. If he just confirmed the oath, he'd say it's only valid if done in court. The sages disagree and say it could be done in or out of court either way. There's liability for intentionally violating this oath, whether or not you do or do not know the punishment. If he's totally unaware it's false, there's no liability. The liability for violating this oath is an asham offering worth at least 2 silver shekels. An oath of deposit specifically is if somebody demands a deposit he claims he'd lent, and the other man says he has no such deposit, and the man requests of him to take an oath, and the man confirms this. If he's lying, there's liability. If the claimant requested the man 5 separate times in or out of court to repay his debt, and each time the man denied owing it with a false oath, he's liable for each of these, as each time he could have retracted and admitted that he owes money. If 5 separate people claimed he owed them money and he swears he has none of their money and it's false, he's liable only once. If, however, he swears he doesn't have the first one's money, nor the second, nor the third, etc., he'd be liable for each of them. Others disagree and say he's only liable for each of them if he says, I swear, at the end, and others even require him to say, I swear, after each listed person. If somebody requests of a man to repay his deposit, his loan, a stolen object, and a lost object, and the man takes a false oath that he has none of these, he has one liability. If he takes a false oath that he doesn't have the deposit, loan, stolen object, and lost object, he's liable for each listed item. Similarly, if somebody demands of another person his wheat, barley, and spelt that he lent him, and the man takes a false oath that he doesn't have any of those, he has one liability. If he took a false oath that he doesn't have his wheat, barley, and spelt, he's liable for each of those. Some say he's even liable if he mentioned everything in singular, saying a wheat, a barley, and a spelt. There's liability for all of those. If somebody demands another admit that he violated or seduced his daughter, requesting him to take an oath, and the man does so, he's liable for an offering if this was false. Others actually disagree, saying you can't pay a fine due to your own admission. Others say fine, but he still would need to repay the woman for the embarrassment and damage, as discussed in earlier tractates. If somebody claims another person stole his ox and the man denies this, taking a false oath, he's liable to bring an offering. If the man admitted to stealing the ox but denied having slaughtered or sold it with a false oath, he's not liable to bring an offering, as he's only denying a fine. If somebody claims another man killed his ox and the man takes a false oath, he's liable. If he claimed the ox killed his slave and he takes a false oath, again, he's only denying a fine, so there's no liability to bring an offering. If somebody claims a man injured and wounded him and the man denies this, taking a false oath, he's liable to bring an offering. If, however, somebody's Canaanite slave claimed he knocked out his tooth or blinded him and he takes a false oath, as he's only giving a monetary payment, he's not liable to bring an offering. To summarize, as a general rule, anybody that would pay money by his own admission to a claim is liable to an asham offering, otherwise he'd be exempt. The Gemara discusses a case. What if somebody takes a false oath of deposit, as we've been discussing, but he'd been warned not to do this by witnesses prior? It's questioned, as typically people who deliberately commit transgressions don't just bring offerings, but it's a question if there's a difference if he was forewarned. Here, it's explained that in such a situation, he wouldn't bring the offering and he'd instead receive lashes. Others disagree with this, saying that's an opinion that's only held by the minority, and they argue points on it further. It suggested that if the person wasn't warned by witnesses, but he did have witnesses watch him take the deposit, his denial of this by a false oath would not have any actual legal consequence, so he apparently should not be held liable. This is additionally discussed. There are further points trying to prove this principle, but it's essentially disproven. Some suggest that if a person makes a false oath denying having a deposit that was actually seen by witnesses, there's liability for doing so, while if his deposit was written in a document, he'd be exempt, as the document represents a claim against collateral from the man's land, and there's no offering brought for denying such a thing. Related cases are discussed along with further sources. There are further points from the Mishnah that are discussed. These are qualified. For instance, it defines individual specifications of false oaths towards claimants as creating separate individual liability for each one. Regarding the latter case of somebody claiming a man violated or seduced his daughter and the man takes a false oath on this, one of the opinions stated there's no liability to bring an offering as he's denying a fine. This would apply here, as he holds the only thing demanded is the fine, as opposed to also the monetary payment for embarrassment and damages. This is as he holds that presumably a person wouldn't trade a set fine for a reimbursement which can vary in size, such as the embarrassment and damages repayment. The other opinion would disagree with all of this. And that's the end of Chapter 5.